The old wooden door creaks in the wind, slicing through the forest. Elise stands frozen in the blood-red dusk, facing Claire and Lucas, the two people who stole her entire life. But it's not their eyes that break her. It's the 4-year-old boy standing just behind them. The boy's eyes are Lucas's. And in that moment, time fractures. 6 years of betrayal, grief, forgiveness, and rebirth. All of it began with a single message. This is the story of a woman who lost everything, walked through the fire set by those she loved most, and emerged to reclaim her soul. You won't be able to look away. Click subscribe now to experience our full collection of gripping cinematic true stories that will haunt you and heal you. My name is Elise Martin, and at 36 I stood on the front porch of the house I once called home. A narrow path lined with dead leaves curved behind me like a memory I didn't want to revisit. Rain fell steadily, soaking the hem of my black dress. The wood beneath my heels creaked as if the house itself remembered the weight of who I used to be. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that comes only after too many goodbyes. Through the glass panel of the old oak door, I saw reflections, mine and the storm's. My face pale and lean stared back like a stranger. A breeze whispered through the nearby trees, and I could almost hear my father's voice calling from the garden. "Elise, don't stay out in the rain like that. You'll catch a cold." But he wasn't there anymore. Inside, the furniture was covered in white sheets, like forgotten ghosts. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and regret. The home my parents built with patient sacrifice and small joys now felt like a stage left abandoned after the last act. And I wasn't here for a reunion. I was here for a funeral. The service had already begun when I arrived at the chapel. Late intentionally, I stood in the back behind rows of umbrellas and solemn faces, all turned toward the simple casket at the front. The sky had opened up, completely pouring grief from above, like it needed the world to cry with me. That was when I saw them. Claire, Lucas, hand in hand, and walking just behind them, a boy. No older than 4, blonde curls, eyes that darted around the chapel wide and curious. My breath caught. That boy had Lucas's jawline, his way of standing, and Claire's eyes. I felt the wind go out of me. My knees buckled, but I didn't fall. I was frozen in place, locked in a moment that somehow hurt more than all the months of silence, the therapy sessions, the sleepless nights that had come before. Claire wore a sleek black coat that clung to her like armor. Lucas couldn't look at me. He glanced once in my direction and quickly turned away, like I was a shadow he couldn't afford to acknowledge. I didn't cry. Not then. My tears were dried up long ago. I waited until the ceremony ended, until the boy was ushered away by a woman I didn't recognize, and until Claire took Lucas's arm again with the confidence of a wife. Then I turned around and walked straight into the rain, letting it wash the past off me like it never belonged. But of course it did. The past belonged to me. All of it. And once it had been beautiful. 6 years ago, I was a trauma surgeon at one of Seattle's top hospitals. High pressure, high stakes. I was good at what I did, maybe too good. The kind of surgeon they paged when someone's life was hanging by a thread at 2 a.m. My apartment overlooked the bay, sleek and modern. My calendar was booked with lectures or rotations and weekend getaways with Lucas Grant. The man I had loved so completely, I'd once thought we shared the same heartbeat. Lucas was the golden professor of comparative literature, handsome in a rumpled tweed jacket way. Students adored him. Colleagues respected him. He quoted Neruda and baked banana bread on Sundays. He made me laugh when I was too tired to breathe. He made me believe in quiet love. We met during a fundraiser for children's literacy. I was dragged there by a nurse friend. Lucas was on the board. We both reached for the same glass of Malbec and wound up talking for hours, missing half the gala. By the 3rd date, we were inseparable. By the 6th, he was teaching me how to make risotto. 18 months later, under the stars and ruts and fairy lights of a rooftop garden, he proposed with a sapphire ring and a trembling voice that still cracks in my memory. "Marry me, Elise. Be the last chapter of my favorite story." I said yes before he finished the sentence. My parents were overjoyed. Especially my father, who had spent years watching me rise through a male-dominated field with silent pride in packed lunches. And Claire, my younger sister, was happy too. Or at least, that's what she told me. Claire had always been complicated. She was beautiful, sharp, always a little unpredictable. While I pursued straight A's and surgical residencies, she wandered through art school and coffee shop jobs. We were different, yes, but close enough to braid each other's hair in childhood and steal each other's clothes in adolescence. I made her my maid of honor. I thought it would bring us closer again. I remember the day I introduced Lucas to Claire. It was at our parents' house. We were all home for Thanksgiving. The turkey was undercooked, the gravy was burnt, and I was buzzing with happiness as Lucas took Claire's hand and said, "It's a pleasure." Claire's smile was wide, a little too wide. She laughed a lot that night, touched his arm when she spoke, quoted poems she barely knew. Lucas laughed too, but I told myself it was politeness. That's what people do when meeting the in-laws. Later in the kitchen, while scraping sweet potatoes into the trash, my mother leaned in and said, "She likes him." "Of course she does," I said. "Everyone likes Lucas." My mother frowned. That's not what I meant, but I didn't want to hear it. My heart was full. My future was set. I was marrying the man I loved, and my little sister was helping plan the biggest day of my life. We picked a venue in the San Juan Islands. Something small, intimate, wrapped in ivy and golden light. Claire offered to help with floral selections, cake tastings, music playlists. She texted me pictures of dresses, joked about dance routines, even offered to take Lucas to pick up his tux when I was stuck in surgery. I thought it was sisterhood. I thought wrong. 2 months before the wedding, Lucas started changing. Late meetings, missed dinners, eyes that didn't meet mine the way they used to. And then that night, the night that took everything. It was raining just like today. I was on call when a teenager came in with a collapsed lung and a broken collarbone. I didn't get home until nearly 3 a.m. I walked through the door exhausted, soaked, and ready to collapse. That's when I realized I'd left my old backup phone at home. Lucas had plugged it in to charge. It lit up when I walked by, and then I saw the messages. They weren't subtle. They weren't even hidden. "Claire, you smell like cinnamon and sin." "Lucas, don't tease me. You know what you do to me." My heart stopped. Scroll. "Claire, when are you going to tell her?" "Lucas, after the wedding, maybe." "Claire, you're mine now. You just don't want to admit it." I dropped the phone. I screamed. I don't remember what I said. Only that the world fell apart in a silence so loud it deafened me. Lucas didn't deny it. He didn't beg. Claire didn't even pretend. I left that night with nothing but a duffel bag and a tremble in my hands I couldn't control. No wedding, no closure. Just betrayal. Just silence. Just rain. I disappeared. For months. Cut everyone off. No calls, no explanations. I quit my job, sold my apartment, deleted my social media. I moved into a cabin in Asheville where no one knew my name, and the only sound at night was the wind clawing at the windows. I worked in a free clinic, served those who had nothing because that's how I felt. Nothing. Hollowed out, empty. And now 6 years later, I stood under a funeral chapel roof, watching my sister hold the hand of the man I once called forever, watching their son, the living proof of every secret, every kiss, every stolen moment they had buried behind my back. And still I didn't cry, because I knew something they didn't. You can only steal from someone who doesn't know their worth. And I had spent 6 years learning just how much I was worth. Before everything shattered, there was beauty. 1,000 small, glittering things that made up the quiet joy of becoming someone's forever. There was the dress shop on 3rd Avenue with the long mirror, and the way my mother cried quietly in the corner when I stepped out in a satin A-line gown. There was the vineyard estate we booked on Whidbey Island, stone arches, creeping ivy, sun-drenched afternoons, where Lucas promised it'll feel like a poem. There was Claire holding my hand through the entire tour, whispering suggestions about flower arrangements and how the sunset hit the ceremony spot just right. She called me every other day. "Have you thought more about the cake? What do you think of blush versus champagne for the bridesmaids? Can I take Lucas to his fitting if you're stuck in surgery again?" And every time I said yes. Of course, thank you. Because trust was never a question, not with Claire. She had been the only one who understood my exhaustion when I came home after a double shift, the one who drew a bath for me when I collapsed on the couch in my scrubs. The one who once said, "If Lucas ever hurts you, I'll kill him." We laughed about it. She brought me coffee with Bridezilla Fuel written in Sharpie on the cup. She threw herself into planning like it was her own wedding. Looking back, maybe it was. There was one night that sticks like a splinter now. I'd just finished a 30-hour rotation. Lucas had dinner waiting, roasted vegetables, garlic chicken, a bottle of red I liked. Claire was already there, feet tucked under her on the couch, flipping through a binder of potential centerpieces. "Sorry," she said. "Hope you don't mind." I was helping him with some logistics. Lucas smiled. "She's been a lifesaver." I nodded, kissed his cheek, tried to shake off the uneasy weight crawling up my spine. Dismissed it. Love is trust. And I was in love, but there were moments. Little cracks I ignored. Lucas didn't look at me quite the same. He started talking about needing space to work on his lectures. Our Sunday hikes became "sorry I'm wiped," and Claire, she was always there. Too present, too available. I chalked it up to wedding stress. Cold feet. Everyone said it happens. Then came the night everything burned. I was scheduled for an emergency laparotomy car accident victim. The surgery ran long. By the time I walked through my apartment door, it was nearly 300 a.m. My legs ached. My eyelids burned. The place was quiet. Lucas's car wasn't in the garage. I dropped my bag, peeled off my damp jacket, and saw my old iPhone plugged in on the kitchen counter. We used it sometimes to play music through the Bluetooth speaker. It was always low on battery, buried in a drawer. But now it sat there, glowing softly. I didn't plan to touch it, but the screen lit up as I passed. A message. "Claire. Wish I could still smell you." My heart kicked like a startled bird. I picked it up. The passcode was mine. Easy. And there they were. Message after message. Not new. Weeks old, maybe months. "Claire, you shouldn't have left that shirt at my place. Now I can't stop thinking about your scent. Lucas, you're dangerous. Claire, only for you." My stomach turned. My fingers trembled. "Lucas, she has no idea." "Claire. Does that make it better or worse?" "Lucas, both." "Claire, meet me after the department mixer. She's working overnight, right?" I stopped breathing. I sank onto the kitchen floor. The tile was cold. The kind of cold that reaches through your skin straight into the bones. Every laugh, every toast, every soft moment we'd shared leading to this wedding contaminated, rotting with deceit. And worse, Claire had been there the whole time, building it with one hand, sabotaging it with the other. I don't remember how long I sat there. I only know that eventually I stood up, walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, stared into the mirror until my reflection blurred. Then I waited. Lucas came home around 5 a.m., hair slightly tousled, shirt untucked. He smelled like mint and lavender, her perfume, not mine. He stopped when he saw me. "Elise," he said, "you're home." Wrong words, just wrong. "You left my old phone out," I said. My voice was even. Too even. He looked at the counter, blinked. "I saw the messages," I said. Silence. A second, maybe two. "Then it's not what you think." I laughed. Actually laughed. "Then you better tell me what it is, because it looks like you've been fucking my sister for months." His face didn't change. Not even guilt. Just calculation. That's what I saw in his eyes. A chess player who's just realized he lost his queen. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said. I crossed my arms. "You tripped and fell into her bed." "Elise." "No," I snapped. "Do not use that tone. Do not say my name like you still have the right." His hands moved to his pockets, defensive. It started slowly. I didn't plan it. "Did she?" I asked. Was this some twisted game the two of you played? Was I the prize you were trying to steal from? He didn't answer. "You know," I said, "she used to tell me how lucky I was. How lucky I was to find someone like you." "She meant it," he said weakly. "And you? Did you mean it every time you told me you loved me? Every night we planned a future together?" Still no answer. I stepped forward. "Say something. Say anything real." He opened his mouth, closed it. "I'm sorry." It landed like a slap. Pathetic. Small. I turned away. "Where is she?" I asked. Silence. "Where is Claire?" He hesitated. "She's at her place." I grabbed my keys. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't sit still. Couldn't breathe in the same air. "Elise, please," he said. "Don't," I said without turning around. "Don't follow me." I drove with headlights off for half the block. I needed the dark. Needed something to match the black hole forming in my chest. Claire lived in a loft apartment near Capitol Hill. I knew the door code. I still had her keys. We'd shared everything. I let myself in. She was sitting on her couch, wearing my hoodie, watching a show I'd recommended. She looked up, saw my face. "Oh," she said. "Just that, oh." "You didn't even have the decency to delete the texts," I said. Claire stood, no guilt, no shame. "Elise, why?" "No," I interrupted. "You don't get to speak first." She took a step toward me. "Don't I warned?" And then she smirked. A small, wicked tilt of the mouth. "You were always the one everyone adored. The prodigy, the surgeon, the golden girl. For once, he chose me." I stared at her. The woman who once held my hand on our first day of kindergarten. Who snuck me peanut butter cups when I had my tonsils out. Who danced with me in the hallway after prom when my date bailed. "Congratulations," I said. "You can have what's left of him." "Elise, I'm done," I said. Her smirk faltered. "I hope it was worth it," I said. Then I walked away. I didn't take anything from her apartment. Not the books we once shared. Not the old photo of us on her fridge. Not the scarf she'd borrowed and never returned. I didn't want souvenirs from betrayal. When I got home, Lucas was gone, so I packed. One suitcase, my credentials, a few framed photos. I wrote no letters, left no notes. I boarded a plane out of Seattle the next morning with nothing but a name I didn't want and a silence that howled like a winter storm. The day I left Seattle, I didn't tell a soul. I didn't leave a letter. I didn't say goodbye. Not to my friends, not to my colleagues, not to my mother. My phone, once a constant hum of alerts and reminders, stayed powered off at the bottom of my duffel bag. I didn't need directions. I didn't want connections. I wanted disappearance. I sold my apartment in less than 2 weeks furnished. I didn't even haggle the price. I just wanted it gone. Every room was a monument to a version of me that no longer existed. The white tile bathroom where I used to hang my scrubs after marathon shifts. The bookshelf where Lucas and I tucked notes into the spines of our favorite novels. The kitchen drawer where my engagement ring had once glimmered in a velvet box. All of it tainted. I left the ring in the garbage disposal. It made a satisfying clink when I flicked the switch on. Not enough to destroy it, but enough to let it know it didn't win. By the end of that month, I was nobody again, and that's exactly what I needed. I headed east, drove through Idaho, Montana, and the Dakotas. I stopped only for gas in cheap motels where no one asked my name. The farther I got from Seattle, the easier it was to breathe. Until it wasn't. Because no matter how far you run, your mind comes with you. I saw Claire in every passing face. Lucas in every reflection that blinked too slowly in a gas station mirror. I heard them in the white noise of hotel televisions I never turned on. Somewhere outside Nashville, I nearly drove off the road because I thought I saw the two of them in the rearview mirror, laughing. That night I parked off a rural road and screamed into my steering wheel until my throat went raw. Grief has many shapes. Mine was a shadow with my sister's smile. I ended up in Asheville by accident, or fate, or exhaustion. I didn't care which. The town was quiet, tucked into the folds of the Blue Ridge Mountains like a secret no one bothered to tell. The kind of place where fog sits on the trees like an old friend, and everyone knows the name of the woman who bags their groceries. I rented a small cabin just outside the edge of town. Pine wood walls, a fireplace I didn't know how to use, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, and a porch that creaked under the weight of every decision I'd ever made. The silence was suffocating at first. I wasn't used to hearing my own thoughts without a beeping heart monitor in the background. I didn't work for the first 2 months. I just sat. Some days I didn't leave the cabin. I watched the way the trees swayed, the way the birds scattered when the wind shifted. I learned that time stretches when there are no alarms, no rounds, no operating rooms. But still, sleep didn't come easy. I woke up every night at 2:43 a.m., like clockwork. That was the hour Lucas had come home the night I found the text. The hour I realized the life I'd built was paper thin and soaked in gasoline. My dreams were jagged and cruel. Claire holding my hand at my wedding in one frame, then kissing Lucas behind the altar in the next. Lucas standing in the OR telling me the patient had died, and the patient was me. I stopped trying to understand them. I just waited for the morning light to make them disappear. Eventually, I walked into the community clinic on Maple Street and asked if they needed help. The nurse at the front desk, an older woman named Mary, with a voice like rusted velvet, asked, "You licensed?" "Yes," I said. "I'm a surgeon." She raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're not lost?" "Pretty sure," I replied. She handed me a clipboard. "Let's see what you've got, city girl." And that's how I became the Monday through Wednesday doctor at a free clinic where half the patients came for checkups and the other half came for someone to listen. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't sterile, but it was real. People came in with broken ribs from falling off ladders, infected cuts from trimming their own dogs, bruises from partners who claimed to drink too hard but love real deep. And they looked at me like I could fix it. Some days I could. Other days I wrote prescriptions I knew wouldn't be filled. But I showed up. And I let them know they mattered. It was strange finding salvation in the wreckage. But maybe that's where it always lives. Still, I was far from healed. I kept to myself. Didn't attend town gatherings. I didn't join the book clubs Mary invited me to. I didn't give my full name to anyone. I was just Doc. At night I drank red wine from the bottle and read books I didn't remember by morning. I stopped calling my mother. She left voicemails I didn't play, emails I didn't open. I told myself I was being merciful, that if I let her into my pain, I'd drown her in it too. But the truth was simpler. I was ashamed. Ashamed of the way I had unraveled. Ashamed that I'd let someone love me just enough to destroy me. Ashamed that the woman who once saved lives in an OR was now hiding in a cabin, afraid to answer the door when the wind knocked too hard. I saw Claire's name everywhere, on magazine covers, Instagram tags I had forgotten to unfollow, wedding photos that found their way into online galleries Lucas's university had shared. The photos were polished and perfect. Lucas in a navy suit, Claire in a dress I almost bought. The ring on her finger mine, the smile on her face stolen. I once threw my laptop across the room. The screen shattered. I didn't replace it for 6 months. Therapy came next. The clinic had a counselor who volunteered Thursdays. Her name was Harriet, 65. Sharp eyes, silver curls. She smelled like peppermint and tough love. "You look like someone who thinks silence is strength," she said one afternoon, after catching me chain-drinking black coffee in the break room. I raised an eyebrow. "And what do you look like?" "Someone who's seen enough women like you to know where this ends." I stared at her. She added, "It ends in ulcers. Or worse, going back to what broke you." That night I sat in her office and said 3 words I hadn't spoken in years. "I need help." And she nodded like she'd been waiting. We didn't talk about Lucas at first. We talked about medicine, about the pressure, the perfectionism, the fear of failure that comes with saving lives. Then we talked about Claire, and that nearly broke me. I loved her more than anyone, I said. More than myself some days. Harriet nodded. And she used that love as currency. "Yes," I whispered, and I let her. I cried in that office more than I ever had as a child. We unpacked my silence. My belief that enduring pain quietly made me strong. We talked about forgiveness, not as a gift to the other, but as a release for myself. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, she said. It means choosing freedom over fury. But I wasn't there yet. I still dreamed of confronting Claire, of screaming, of watching her perfect little world unravel like mine had. But more than anything, I dreamed of peace, of one morning where I could open my eyes and not feel like I was made of glass. It didn't come fast, but it came, in small ways. The first time I laughed at something Mary said without faking it. The first time I cooked a real meal and didn't eat it over the sink. The first time I slept through 2:43 a.m. The first time I looked in the mirror and thought, she's still in there. The woman who survived the fire. She was broken, but she was alive. And maybe that was enough for now. He walked into the clinic on a Tuesday, soaked from the waist down in mountain rain and carrying a notepad like it was a weapon, not a laptop, not a recorder. An actual notepad, spiral-bound corners curled and pages water-stained. I was standing at the front desk, arguing with the vending machine over whether it would accept my crumpled dollar. I glanced at him just long enough to clock the soaked boots and disheveled hair, then went back to pressing the B3 button like it owed me an apology. Mary gave a small grunt behind me. "You're about to meet trouble." "Isn't that what we're here for?" I muttered. He reached the counter. "Hi. Jonah Hayes. I called yesterday." Mary blinked. "The reporter." "Investigative journalist," he corrected with a lopsided grin. "But yeah." That was the first time I heard his voice. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't rehearsed. It was the kind of voice that didn't bother pretending gravelly in the back like it had seen too much smoke and too many late nights. He was here to write about the regional hospital, some scandal involving forged patient records and falsified clinical trials for a new medication. The kind of thing that happens when profit quietly nudges ethics off a ledge. I wasn't interested. In him, in the story, in anyone who smelled like ambition and notebooks. But then he turned toward me and said, "You're Dr. Elise Martin, right?" I stiffened. "I read one of your papers back in med school," he added. "Something about hemorrhagic shock and split-second trauma responses." I raised an eyebrow. "You're not a doctor." "No," he said. "But I was a med student before I switched to journalism." I didn't respond. He didn't apologize. That was the beginning. He came back every week, always polite, always asking questions that cut deeper than they looked. He talked to nurses, patients, janitors, volunteers, anyone who had seen what medicine looks like when profit bleeds it dry. And eventually he started talking to me. "Can I ask what made you leave hospital work?" he said one day when we were both standing in the parking lot sipping terrible coffee out of styrofoam cups. I didn't answer at first, just looked at the sky. The clouds were thick like bruises waiting to spill. He didn't press. "Wrong question," he said. "Just old," I replied. He nodded like that made sense. Some old questions still deserve answers. I wanted to hate him for that line, but I couldn't. Because there was something about Jonah that felt safe. Not in a soft, easy way, but in the way standing at the edge of a cliff feels safe if you know you won't be pushed. He listened more than he spoke. And when he did speak, it wasn't to impress. It was to understand. One afternoon, he left a book on my desk. A dog-eared copy of Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking. No note, no explanation, just the book. That night, I read it cover to cover. And when I closed it, I realized something had shifted. He understood loss. He didn't flaunt it, didn't wear it like a badge, but it lived in his pauses, in the way he asked about my sleep patterns, like he knew insomnia by name. I started leaving the break room door open when I knew he was on site. He started bringing 2 coffees instead of 1, and somewhere between those silent exchanges and the slow, careful laughs we began to share, I felt a part of myself stir again, not the part that had belonged to Lucas, or to Claire, or to the life I left behind. A new part, a quieter one that didn't need to be perfect, just real. It wasn't romantic, not at first. It was just warm. Jonah showed up for a clinic fundraising event, even though no one expected him to. He wore a wrinkled blazer and mismatched socks. I teased him about it. He grinned and told me the socks were lucky. That night, we cleaned up the folding chairs together while everyone else went home. The moonlight made the cracked linoleum look almost beautiful. He asked if I ever missed its surgery. The adrenaline, the control. Sometimes I admitted. But mostly I missed the certainty. The clean lines between life and death. "And now?" he asked. "Now it's all blurred." He nodded slowly. "But maybe that's where the real stuff lives. In the blur." I looked at him, then really looked. There was no pity in his eyes. No agenda. Just a tired man who'd spent too much time in the dark trying to shine a light where it mattered. "I don't do complicated," I said quietly. He tilted his head. "Is that what I am?" "No," I said. "I am." His smile faded, not in offense, in understanding. "I don't want anything from you, Elise," he said. "Not a story, not a fix, just conversation. And maybe a sandwich, if you're offering." We ended up sitting on my porch that night, sharing leftover grilled cheese and talking about all the things we used to want. He told me about his divorce, about how his wife left him for her Pilates instructor. I told him about Lucas and Claire, the whole ugly, dripping truth. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice, just sat with it, let it live in the space between us. At the end of the night, he stood up and said, "You're not broken? Just bent in places they never earned the right to touch." I didn't sleep much that night, but for the first time, my dreams weren't haunted. They were quiet. It took months before I let him touch my hand, even longer before I let him kiss me. We moved like people learning how to walk again, hesitant, off balance, but determined. He never pushed, never rushed, never asked for more than I could give. And slowly I started to give, pieces at a time. We went hiking on weekends. Nothing steep, nothing wild, just paths where the silence didn't feel like a threat. He introduced me to his brother over Zoom. I introduced him to Mary, who gave him hell and then made him cookies. We didn't talk about love, not yet, but it hovered, gently. Like the sound of distant thunder on a clear day you knew it was coming, even if you didn't see the storm. One evening, as we sat in front of my fireplace, he reached over and brushed a curl behind my ear. "You ever gonna let yourself breathe again?" he asked. "I'm trying," I said. He nodded. "Try harder." I laughed. "Is that your version of encouragement?" "It's my version of not letting you waste a single second more on people who don't get to own you." I didn't cry, but something inside me cracked open. I started writing again. Not research papers or case studies, just thoughts, fragments, a journal full of sentences I didn't show anyone. I started calling my mother again. Short calls, safe ones, just to hear her voice. I stopped looking up Claire's name online. I stopped counting the days since Lucas. I started counting the days since I last felt like a ghost. And slowly I forgave myself, not for falling in love, but for believing I wasn't enough when it ended. Jonah never asked me to be more than I was, and that was how I knew I wanted to be more for myself. One day he handed me a folded slip of paper. It was a ticket. "Chicago," I said. "Why?" "Conference," he shrugged. "Figured you might want a change of view. Fresh air and new ghosts." I smiled. "You asking me to run away with you?" "No," he said. "I'm asking if you're ready to stop running from you." I didn't answer right away. But that night I packed a bag. Because sometimes healing doesn't knock. Sometimes it stands quietly in the rain, waiting for you to open the door. And I did. The call came on a Monday morning, just as the fog outside my cabin started to lift. I didn't recognize the number. I almost let it ring out, assuming it was spam or someone asking about my car's extended warranty. But something in my gut said, "Pick up." It was my mother. Her voice was hollow, stretched thin across grief. "Elise, he's gone. Your father passed away this morning. Massive heart attack." There was no warning. The silence that followed wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I didn't know how to react to the death of a man who had stopped being a father the day he chose silence over truth. My mind immediately filled with images. His workbench in the garage, his steady hands fixing a leaky faucet the way he used to call me Tiger. Even when I was well into my 20s, I thought about the last time we spoke. He'd left a message after I disappeared. "You always were the strong one. Come home if you can. We miss you." I never called back. Now I wouldn't get the chance. "I'll be there," I told my mother. I didn't cry. I just started packing. Jonah drove me to the airport without asking questions. He didn't say, "Are you ready?" or "Will you be okay?" He just said, "I'll be here when you're done." And somehow that helped more than any promise could. The flight to Boston was long and turbulent. A fitting metaphor. My mind was a storm, thunderclaps of memory, crosswinds of resentment. As the plane descended, I felt the weight of unfinished conversations, unopened wounds, unspoken truths pressing down on my lungs. When I arrived at my childhood home, the world around it looked almost comically unchanged. The mailbox still leaned slightly to the left. The oak tree still had the rope swing, though it sagged now like it hadn't been touched in years. But the house itself, it felt foreign, like a museum built on top of my childhood. I rang the bell, even though I still had a key. That small detail felt symbolic. I wasn't walking back into my life. I was visiting its ruins. My mother opened the door with a softness that broke something in me. She looked older, thinner, as if grief had been living inside her long before this phone call. "Elise," she whispered, arms pulling me in before I had a chance to prepare. For a moment I let her hold me. Let myself be someone's daughter again. But then I heard the voice that cut through my spine like glass dragged over tile. "Mom, where should I go?" Claire stood at the base of the staircase, dressed in tasteful black hair pulled into a sleek bun. Beside her, half hidden behind her legs, was a boy. 4 years old, maybe 5. Blonde hair, serious eyes. He looked up at me like I was a stranger. Because I was. My breath caught. She didn't introduce him. Lucas appeared behind her. My stomach flipped. He looked older, weathered, not ruined, but not the man I remembered either. He met my eyes only for a second before looking away, suddenly fascinated by the grain of the wooden floor. "Coward." "Welcome home, Claire," said her voice smooth, practiced, polished like a political candidate. "It's been a while." I said nothing. because what could I say that wouldn't ignite the house? My mother gently touched my elbow. "Why don't we go upstairs for a moment?" I nodded, letting her guide me down the hallway I used to sprint through as a kid. She opened the door to my old bedroom. The wallpaper was different, but the bed frame was the same. The air carried the faint scent of rose water and thyme. "I wanted you to have a minute," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "This was your space?" "It still is." I looked around. My eyes landed on the bookshelf, half empty now, and the closet slightly ajar. She reached into the nightstand drawer and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. It was sealed. My name written on it in my father's familiar scrawl. "Elise," she said, placing it in my hand. "He wrote this a few weeks ago. I didn't read it. He said it was for you only." I stared at it. The paper trembled slightly in my fingers. "Take your time," she said. Then she left me alone in the room. I sat on the bed, heart pounding. Then I opened it. "Elise, if you're reading this, I'm not here anymore, and that's a regret I'll carry into the next life, if there is one. There's something I need to say before it's too late. 6 years ago, Lucas came to see me. Alone. It was just a few weeks before the wedding. I remember it was raining. He sat on the porch and told me he didn't know if he could go through with it. Said he was confused. That he'd developed feelings for Claire. I told him to be a man, to make a decision, but not to hurt you. He promised he'd do the right thing. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that Claire wouldn't do that to you. That love in our family still meant something solid. But Elise, I was wrong. I knew something wasn't right. I saw how Claire looked at him, how he looked away when you mentioned the wedding. And I said nothing. I told myself it was your life, your choice, that it wasn't my place, but I should have warned you. I should have spoken up. Instead, I let silence do my speaking. And I watched you walk straight into heartbreak without lifting a finger to stop it. I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not even asking. I just want you to know it wasn't your fault, none of it. They took something from you. And I helped them do it by standing still. Whatever else you do with your life, Elise, please don't carry my silence like a burden. Let it stay with me. Love, Dad. I stared at the letter until the words blurred. Until the room around me spun. Until the ceiling felt like it might crack open and swallow me whole. I wanted to throw it, burn it, hug it. Instead, I folded it carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into my jacket pocket like a piece of armor. I sat on the floor of my old bedroom and let myself cry. Not the broken, hopeless sobs of 6 years ago. This was something different. Grief, yes, but also release. I cried for the version of me that waited for my father to take my side. I cried for the child that believed family meant protection. I cried for the woman who'd had her trust amputated in silence. Downstairs, I could hear voices, muted distant. The clink of silverware. Claire's forced laughter. Lucas's low tone always on the edge of disappearing. And I didn't care. They could toast posture pretend, but I had the truth now. Finally. Even if it came too late to change the past. It changed me. When I walked back down those stairs, I didn't shrink. Claire looked up. Her expression faltered for a half-second before resetting to default elegance. Lucas didn't look at me at all. And the boy he sat at the table playing with a small red truck. Oblivious. Innocent. My mother met my gaze across the room. She saw it. The knowing. And she nodded. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the dishes were piled high in the sink, my mother poured me tea in a chipped mug and sat across from me. "You read it?" she asked. I nodded. She sighed deep and worn. He carried that guilt every day. "I know," I said. So did I. She reached for my hand. "I missed you," she said, even when I didn't know how to say it. "I missed you too," I whispered. We sat in silence for a long while. Then she said, "You'll stay for the funeral." "Yes." And after, "I don't know." And that was enough. Because the door had opened. And this time I wasn't walking in as a daughter seeking answers. I was walking in as a woman who'd survived the fire and now knew where the matches had come from. I didn't sleep. The hours crawled by, dragging me with them. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, the letter from my father in my hand, the air thick with memories that no longer belonged to me. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, like it knew something was broken in the house. Inside, I replayed every second of the last few days. The way Lucas couldn't meet my eyes. The way Claire held herself like she'd already won something. The boy, their boy, with a jawline I knew too well. I tried to cry again, but the tears had run dry. All that was left was the burn. The letter lay folded on my lap like a confession that had come too late to prevent the crime, but just in time to testify. I watched the moon move across the floorboards, the light shifting across the desk where I used to do my homework, and I knew it this night would be the last I ever spent under this roof. Some endings come with fire, some with silence. Mine would come with truth. At dawn, I padded down the stairs in bare feet. The house was quiet. My mother had gone to bed hours earlier. Lucas and the boy had left. But Claire was in the kitchen. Of course she was. She stood by the window, coffee mug in hand, wrapped in a satin robe that looked too expensive for grief. She turned when she heard my footsteps, and her smile curled tight, sharp, confident. "Elise," she said like my name was a flavor she'd forgotten she didn't like. Couldn't sleep. I leaned against the doorway. Not really. She sipped her coffee slowly, eyes scanning my face for fractures. "Long trip for you. I suppose it's nostalgic being back." I didn't answer. She stepped closer, and I watched her move like someone who'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in the mirror. "I never expected you to come," she said. "Honestly, I thought you'd stay tucked away in whatever mountain town you disappeared to. I guess you don't know me as well as you thought." She tilted her head. "Maybe not. But I do know that silence suits you. You always were more graceful when you weren't trying to fix everything." I smiled, small measured. "And you always mistook grace for weakness." Claire's eyes narrowed just slightly, the first crack in her perfectly painted exterior. She set the mug down on the counter. "You're angry. I get it. But that was 6 years ago, Elise. People move on. People evolve." "Did you evolve?" I asked. "I did what I had to do," she said. "I made a choice. And Lucas, he chose me back. That wasn't theft. That was timing. You call betrayal timing. I call it love." She snapped, then softened. "Not that you'd understand. You never really saw him, Elise, not the way I did. You loved the idea of Lucas, the resume, the dinner parties, the curated playlists. I loved the man." "No," I said. "You loved that I had him." Claire blinked. I stepped into the kitchen, the morning light slicing through the blinds in sharp golden lines. It painted shadows across her face, revealing the tightness in her jaw, the twitch of a nerve below her eye. "I read the letter," I said. For a moment, she didn't respond. "Then what letter?" "Dad's." He knew. Lucas told him before the wedding, and Dad said nothing. You said nothing. Claire crossed her arms. "You think that changes anything? You think a dead man's guilt rewrites history?" "No," I said quietly, "but it confirms it." Her mouth tightened. "You wanted to be me," I continued. "You always did. You wanted the grades, the praise, the path. You wanted to win. And you thought if you took enough, you could finally feel whole." She laughed short and bitter. "You think this is about envy, Elise? Look at me. I have the husband, the house, the family." I didn't flinch. "You have what you stole. But you'll never have what you broke." Claire's expression faltered. I stepped closer, my voice calm but cutting. "You think you've taken everything from me? But there's something missing in you, Claire. And that emptiness, it's not mine to fix anymore." She looked away, jaw clenched. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the folded letter, and held it for just a moment in the space between us. "I came here for Dad," I said. "Not to fight, not to rehash. Just to close the door the right way this time." She stared at the letter, eyes flicking across the name written on the envelope. Her hand twitched, but she didn't reach for it. "Elise," she said softer now, but I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I didn't slam the door. Some exits don't need noise. My suitcase waited by the front door. My mother was sitting in the armchair, holding a photo album in her lap. She looked up when she saw me. "You're leaving?" she asked, though she already knew. I nodded. She stood, walked over, and pulled me into a long hug. "The kind mothers give when they know they can't protect you, only honor your choices." "I wish things had been different," she said into my shoulder. "So do I whispered. Outside, the taxi was already pulling up. I kissed her cheek. "I'll call, soon." She smiled with teary eyes. "Tell Jonah thank you for being there when we weren't." I nodded. My throat was too tight for more. The ride to the train station was silent. The city passed by like a memory I no longer belonged to. Gray sidewalks, familiar intersections, restaurants I'd once laughed inside, all faded, all distant. At the platform, Jonah was already waiting. He stood with his back to the arriving train, a paper cup in each hand, eyes scanning the crowd until they found me. And when they did, when his eyes met mine, I didn't have to say a word. He walked over, handed me the coffee, and said, "Bawao. Did the dragon breathe fire or just smoke?" "A little of both," I said, smiling tiredly. We sat on the bench, shoulders barely touching. I reached into my coat and pulled out the letter. I didn't open it, just held it. Jonah looked at it and nodded slowly. "Closure." "No," I said, but something close to it. He didn't push. Instead, he handed me a folded napkin with a drawing scribbled on it, 2 stick figures on a mountain trail. One of them was holding a huge backpack. The other had a speech bubble that read, "You can drop that now." I laughed, breathless and surprised. "You drew this?" He shrugged. "I dabble." I looked at the little figure with the heavy pack and realized I wasn't carrying mine alone anymore. When the train doors opened, we stood. And this time, when I stepped forward, I didn't look back, not because I didn't care, but because I finally knew where I was going. The invitation was handwritten, short and unceremonious. No embossed cards, no calligraphy. Just a single sheet of cream paper, slipped into the mailboxes of a few close friends and taped to the back wall of the community clinic with a push pin that had once held up a flu shot poster. Elise and Jonah. Saturday. The clearing at 7 Pines. Noon. No dress code. Just love. That was it. There was no florist. No planner. No countdown calendar hanging on the fridge. No registry full of china sets and monogrammed towels. Elise didn't want a dress that made her feel like a bride. She wanted to feel like a woman reborn, barefoot in the forest, with soil beneath her and truth above. Jonah didn't wear a tie. He showed up in a rumpled linen shirt and dark jeans, carrying a flask of whiskey and a bundle of wildflowers he'd picked himself. Mary from the clinic played the violin, and someone's teenage son filmed the ceremony on an old camcorder from the 90s. The air smelled like moss and promise. The forest clearing, surrounded by towering pines and sunlight that filtered down in sharp golden shafts, became a cathedral more sacred than stained glass or marble could ever be. Elise walked into it slowly. No veil, no bouquet, no applause. Only Jonah waiting with that look like he was seeing her, all of her for the very first time, and the 1,000th. She had written her vows on the back of a patient chart. Ink smudged, folded in thirds. But when she read them, her voice didn't shake. I thought healing meant returning to who I was before. But then I met you, and you showed me healing means becoming someone who can survive after. Someone who can love again, not because the past didn't matter, but because I mattered more. Jonah, in turn, pulled a crumpled notepad page from his back pocket, torn from the same pad he used to chase down corruption and cover-ups. His words were fewer but heavier. "You're the story I never knew I was trying to write. The kind where no one's a hero or villain, just 2 people scarred and stubborn enough to try again." They kissed beneath the wind chime hush of forest leaves. The wind clapped for them. They danced barefoot to the sound of Jonah's old car stereo playing a Sinatra song that kept skipping. And when the sun dipped behind the trees, turning everything a soft amber, they sat by the fire pit, with the 10 people who mattered most, passing around roasted corn and cider and stories. No one asked about Lucas, or Claire, or the past Elise had finally buried. Because this wasn't a celebration of escape. It was a declaration of presence. A quiet, radical joy that said, "We're still here." After everything. A year passed like a breath. Elise and Jonah settled into a rhythm. Morning coffee on the porch, clinic days, bookstore nights. Jonah typing away at articles that exposed bad funding and worse hospital boards, while Elise stitched up broken fingers and offered soft words to mothers who couldn't afford antibiotics for their kids. Their cabin, once a hiding place, became a home. Not with granite countertops or perfectly curated throw pillows, but with life. Mismatched mugs, laughter echoing down the hallway, socks on the floor, quiet grace. It was early spring when the fire broke out, a trailer on the edge of town, electrical, fast, unforgiving. By the time the firefighters got there, it was already gone. They found the little girl near the tree line, standing barefoot in the ash, clutching a melted plastic doll. 4 years old, smoke in her lungs, no name she could remember, no family to claim her. The county called Elise first. They knew she had a background in trauma. They knew she didn't look away. "She needs someone tonight," the social worker said over the phone. "Just until we figure things out." Jonah was already grabbing the spare blankets before Elise hung up. When the girl arrived, silent and wild-eyed, Elise knelt down slowly. She didn't say, "You're safe now." She didn't say, "It'll be okay." She simply opened her arms. The girl didn't move at first. Then, after a full minute, she stepped forward and melted into Elise's chest like she'd always known where she belonged. They named her Grace, because that's what it felt like. Not a gift, not a reward, but a kind of mercy. Adoption was complicated. Red tape, court dates, evaluations. Elise filled out forms she couldn't pronounce, sat through interviews that made her justify love with bullet points and pay stubs. But through it all, Grace clung to her, spoke in whispers, drew pictures of Mama with curly hair and Papa with a big notebook. She called Jonah Joe for the first 3 months. Then one day she said Dad like it had always been there. Elise cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes after that. And when the papers were finalized, when the judge smiled and said, "Congratulations, Ms. Martin," she corrected her. "It's Mrs. Hayes now," Elise said, because somewhere along the way, she had taken Jonah's name, not because she needed his identity, but because she was finally proud to share her own with someone who deserved it. The clinic expanded. With Jonah's help, Elise secured funding to open a second location closer to the mountain communities where care was scarce. She named it the Willow Center. "Why a willow?" Jonah asked one night, tracing the outline of her shoulder in bed. "They bend," Elise said. "But they don't break." And neither did she. She worked 3 days a week now, enough to help, not enough to lose herself again. On her off days, she volunteered at Grace's preschool, Raid to Children, or helped plant herbs in the garden behind the cabin. Some nights she still woke up at 2:43 a.m. But now, there was a small body curled between her and Jonah, a tiny arm draped across her chest, a sleepy whisper, asking for water or just to make sure you're still here. And she was. Fully. Completely. Here. One rainy afternoon, Elise found herself sitting by the fire, Grace asleep in her lap, Jonah editing an article with his glasses halfway down his nose. She looked around the room, framed photos, scribbled drawings. The chipped mug Jonah refused to throw away. The dog-eared book she'd once hated but now reread every year. She thought about who she'd been on the floor of that Seattle apartment, holding a phone full of betrayal and believing she would never breathe clean air again. She thought about the letter from her father, still folded in her journal, a reminder that even silence can be forgiven when met with truth. She thought about Claire and how healing didn't mean reconciliation, but peace. And then she looked down at Grace, who stirred and sighed and curled in tighter. "I used to think healing was something you do alone," Elise said softly. Jonah looked up. "But it's not," she continued. "Healing is what happens when you let yourself be known and still loved." Jonah smiled, closing his laptop. "And here I thought it was the whiskey." Elise laughed deep and real. Then she leaned back into the cushions, closed her eyes, and let the rain drum gently on the roof above them. Not mourning, not waiting, just living. Finally, the call came just after midnight, slicing through the quiet hum of the cabin. Elise recognized the number immediately, an old area code tied to old lives, and answered without hesitation. It was the hospital in Boston. Her mother had collapsed at home. Stroke. Not fatal, but serious. "She's stable," the nurse said. "But we suggest family be close by for the next few days, especially daughters." That last word landed heavy. Daughters. Plural. By sunrise, Elise was packing her overnight bag. Jonah gently helped fold her sweaters, his eyes watching her closely. He didn't ask if she was okay. He knew the answer would be complicated. Grace came padding into the room, still in pajamas, dragging her stuffed rabbit behind her. "Are you going away again?" she asked. "Just for a few days, honey. Grandma's not feeling well." Grace frowned, then hugged Elise's legs. "Can I come too?" Elise knelt. "Not this time. But I'll be back before your next bedtime story. Promise." Jonah drove her to the train station again. This time they didn't talk much. The silence between them was comfortable, stitched with trust. He kissed her forehead before she boarded, whispered, "No armor needed." The ride into Boston was gray and endless, the cityscape bleeding through the windows like a memory trying to reassert itself. She hadn't been back since the funeral, hadn't wanted to. But life, it seemed, didn't care much for personal timelines. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. Her mother was in a recovery room on the 3rd floor, hooked up to machines that beeped and pulsed with every fragile breath. Elise sat beside the bed holding her hand. She looked smaller than Elise remembered, more human, more tired. "Hi, Mom," Elise whispered. The older woman stirred slightly, eyes fluttering open. Her gaze landed on Elise, and something eased in her shoulders. "You came," she said, voice dry and broken. "Of course." Her mother closed her eyes again. She didn't. Elise didn't ask who she was. She already knew. She stayed most of that day. Helped adjust pillows, talk to nurses, read half a book. By the time evening rolled around, she was ready to check into a motel. But something pulled her. Instead of calling a cab, she walked the familiar streets back toward the old house. The neighborhood hadn't changed. Same cracked sidewalks, same rusted fences. But the house looked deflated, as if the life had been slowly leaking from its walls over the years. She knocked out of habit. No one answered. She tried the door, unlocked. Inside it was dim, quiet. Furniture covered with white sheets like ghosts waiting for the right time to haunt. And then footsteps. Claire appeared at the top of the staircase, wearing a wrinkled sweater and no makeup. Her hair, usually perfect, hung limp against her cheeks. She looked nothing like the sister who had once smirked in the kitchen over a cup of coffee and a stolen life. "Elise?" Her voice cracked. "I came to check on Mom," Elise said. Claire nodded slowly, then descended the stairs like every step cost her something. "You're the only one who did," she said. They stood in silence for a beat. Then Claire's eyes welled, and the first sob tore free like it had been held in for years. "She's gone," Claire said, collapsing onto the couch. "Everything's gone." Elise stayed where she was. "Lucas left me," Claire choked out. "Walked out 6 months ago. Said he couldn't breathe anymore. That I drained him. That I was never what he really wanted." She laughed a brittle, awful sound. "Then the company failed. He sank it with some idiotic investment, and now he's run off to God knows where while the lawyers chew through the ashes." Elise remained silent. Claire's hands shook as she wiped at her cheeks. "I have nothing. Nothing. His parents are suing for custody of Ethan. They have more money, a bigger house. I got Elise, I might lose my son." Her voice broke completely. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered. And that's when Elise moved. She walked into the kitchen, flicked the switch. The light above the stove buzzed and flickered into life. She opened the cabinet and pulled down 2 mugs, old ones mismatched, chipped. She filled the kettle. Let the silence stretch between them, like thread tightening between 2 nails. Claire followed timidly. She leaned against the doorframe like a child caught sneaking out at night. When the tea was ready, Elise poured it slowly, then placed a mug in front of her sister. Claire stared at it, then at Elise. "I didn't come to ask for anything," she said. "I just didn't know where else to go." Elise sat across from her, calm, unmoved, but not unkind. "You're not here for me," she said. "You're here because the mirror cracked and now you're terrified of what you see." Claire winced. "I spent years thinking you had everything," Elise continued. "But all you ever had were stolen things, borrowed things, things that were never meant to be yours." "I know," Claire whispered. "I know I was wrong." Elise nodded. Then gently, firmly, "You don't need to find what you lost. You need to find what you never built. Yourself. Not the version shaped by jealousy or someone else's shadow. The real one." Claire's lips trembled. Her shoulders heaved. "You think I can?" "I think you'll never know until you try." They sat in silence again, sipping tea that tasted like old memories and maybe something new. When Elise stood to leave, Claire didn't ask her to stay. She only whispered, "Thank you," like it was the first honest thing she'd said in years. Outside, the air was sharp with cold and regret. Elise pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and walked toward the edge of the street where a cab idled. The city lights shimmered in puddles, reflecting 1,000 different versions of who she used to be. She didn't look back. She didn't need to, because this time the past wasn't chasing her. It was staying exactly where it belonged. It happened on a Wednesday morning, just as the frost had begun to retreat from the edges of the Asheville hills. The call was brief. Her mother had passed quietly in her sleep, the nurse said. No pain, no sudden alarms, just a soft slipping away, like the tide pulling back into the sea. Elise sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the phone still pressed to her ear even after the line had gone dead. Grace was coloring on the floor beside her. Jonah watched from the doorway, not asking anything he knew. Grief when he saw it, and he knew how it walked silent, steady, without knocking. 3 days later, they were on a train back to Boston, back to the past, back to the family Elise had once fled with a heart full of ash and salt. The church was old Lutheran, with stained glass windows depicting saints whose eyes never met yours. The air inside smelled of wood polish, cold air, and something else, something older. The pews filled slowly. Elise sat near the front with Jonah and Grace. Her daughter held tightly to a stuffed bunny, clutching it like a shield. Jonah's hand found hers beneath the wooden bench, fingers wrapping around her knuckles, warm and certain. Claire arrived late. She walked in quietly, alone, wearing a plain black dress. No pearls, no husband, no entourage. Her eyes scanned the room, but never settled. Until they found Elise. Their eyes met and neither of them looked away. When the service began, the minister spoke of legacy, of mothers and daughters, of the threads we carry and the ones we're forced to break. Elise didn't cry. She listened. She let the words flow over her like water over stone, not erasing anything, but softening the sharpest edges. When the service ended, Claire approached slowly. Elise stood still, not retreating, not inviting. They faced each other by the final pew as mourners passed by, offering nods and quiet condolences. Claire looked at Grace. First, her cheeks, rosy eyes wide, clutching Jonah's pant leg. Then her gaze rose to Jonah, who met her stare with polite, distant calm. And then finally she looked at Elise. There was no apology in her eyes, no grand confession, only something heavier. Regret, age, the quiet fatigue of a woman who had run out of illusions. "She's beautiful," Claire said softly, nodding toward Grace. "She is," Elise replied. Claire's voice trembled. "He looks at you like your heir, like without you, he'd choke." Elise didn't answer. Claire looked down, then back up again. "You deserve this," she whispered. "All of it." There was no challenge in her voice, no bitterness, only surrender. Elise tilted her head, studying her sister, not as a rival, not as a thief, but as a woman finally learning the weight of what she'd carried and what she'd broken trying to carry it. She said only 2 words, "Thank you," and for the first time in a very, very long time. Claire smiled. It wasn't joy. It was release, a soft exhale of someone who'd been holding their breath for 6 years. She turned and left without looking back, and Elise didn't follow. The burial was small. The air was brisk, the wind sharp, the sky an unbroken gray. The casket was lowered as someone read a verse Elise barely heard. She stood with Jonah and Grace, hands clasped together, hearts quiet. There was no great unraveling, no collapsing, just a slow goodbye. Afterward, at the reception, Elise stepped out for air. She walked to the edge of the cemetery where the oldest headstones tilted like weary sentinels and sat on a bench carved from stone. Jonah found her 10 minutes later. "She wanted to be better," Elise said, eyes still on the horizon. "But wanting isn't always enough." Jonah didn't reply. He just sat beside her. She was afraid, Elise added. Afraid of being second. Afraid of being invisible. I think she thought taking what was mine would make her real." "And did it?" he asked gently. Elise shook her head. It just made her lonely. They sat for a long time in silence. Then Grace came running toward them, bunny still in hand, cheeks flushed. She climbed into Elise's lap without a word and rested her head against her shoulder. Elise kissed the top of her head. "I don't want to be angry anymore," she whispered. Jonah put his arm around both of them. "Then don't," he said. And for the first time, she believed she didn't have to be. It was the 3rd night after the funeral when Claire knocked on Elise's door in Asheville. Not called, not texted. Just showed up with a weathered coat, a small duffel bag, and a face drawn tight from something more than travel. Jonah opened the door. For a second, neither spoke. Then he simply stepped aside and said, "She's in the back." Claire walked in slowly, her eyes adjusting to the soft, warm light of a home not built on pretense. Grace's toys lay scattered in the corner, books on the coffee table, the faint sound of an old jazz record humming low from the speaker. Elise sat on the porch swing, in a chunky sweater legs, tucked beneath her, a steaming mug in hand. When Claire stepped out, Elise didn't move. She simply looked up and gestured to the chair beside her with her eyes. Claire sat. The night air was crisp, but not cruel. Stars blinked above them like silent witnesses. The crickets were the only ones brave enough to fill the pause. They didn't speak for several minutes. Then Claire began. "I used to stare at your trophies when I was 12. That shelf in the hallway. The one with your spelling bee medals, your science ribbons. I hated them." Elise said nothing. Claire laughed dryly. "Not because I didn't want to be proud. I just didn't know how to live next to someone who got everything right." She rubbed her hands together, eyes staring out into the dark. I remember watching Dad look at you when you graduated med school. That kind of pride. I don't think I ever made him look like that, Elise spoke softly. Dad loved you. Claire looked over. Maybe. But not like you. You were his compass. I was his compass error. Elise took a sip of tea. I didn't know you felt that way. You weren't supposed to, Claire said. I built my entire personality around pretending I didn't. She leaned back in the chair, eyes rimmed red. I don't have excuses, Elise. Not anymore. I betrayed you. I have betrayed every bit of trust you ever gave me. I took something that wasn't mine, and I knew it. Her voice cracked. I thought Lucas would fix everything. That being with him would prove I was enough. But it didn't. All it proved was that I was scared and selfish and so wrong. Silence again. Claire swallowed hard. You didn't deserve what I did to you. Elise closed her eyes for a long moment. I know, she said quietly. Claire's shoulders dropped. And now she asked, barely above a whisper, what happens now? Elise stood and stepped inside for a moment, returning with a worn cloth-bound book. It was frayed at the edges, the pages yellowed from years of bedside reading. She handed it to Claire. Their mother's journal. Claire stared at it, hands trembling slightly as she opened the cover. Her eyes scanned the familiar handwriting, softer and loopier than she remembered. Elise said I read that the night after the funeral. The last few entries were written when Mom knew. She didn't have long. Claire flipped forward slower now, more reverent. Elise always carried more than she let on one entry read. And Claire? She's still trying to find her place in a room that was never built for her voice. I made mistakes. With both. But I pray that after I'm gone, they'll find the space to meet as sisters. Not adversaries. Just girls who once played hide-and-seek under the same maple tree. Claire choked back a sob. I didn't know she saw me like that, she whispered. She did, Elise said. Claire set the journal on her lap, arms folded around it like a child with a security blanket. I want to be better, she said. I'm not asking for your forgiveness tonight. Maybe not ever. I just want to start. Elise sat back down. I'm not ready to erase the past, she said. But I'm not interested in carrying it around either. Claire looked at her. So where does that leave us? Elise glanced toward the doorway where Jonah now stood, holding Grace in his arms. The little girl, half asleep, blinked at Claire with no judgment, no history, just curiosity. It leaves us here, Elise said. On a porch. At the edge of what could be something different. Claire exhaled. She didn't smile, but her hands unclenched. And for the first time in years, Elise didn't feel like she was bracing for the next betrayal. She just felt tired and ready. The sun began to slip behind the trees, stretching golden arms through the backyard, like a quiet benediction. Elise stood barefoot on the porch, her arms around Jonah and Grace. Their bodies pressed close together in a gentle embrace that required no words. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. Full of breath, of shared memories, of the invisible threads that wove this new family together. Jonah's chin rested on the top of Elise's head. Grace, now 7, was taller than she had been that first night in the hospital hallway when they met. She was growing fast, curious, gentle, funny, in a way that reminded Elise both of herself and of someone she had never been allowed to be as a child. And Elise, she was no longer waiting, not waiting for apologies, for clarity, for the weight of pain to lift like fog. It had lifted slowly over months and seasons, in kindnesses and small decisions. The replanting of a garden bed, the repainting of a hallway, the way Jonah kissed her forehead each morning like it was a ritual meant to preserve light. Now, as the sun dropped lower, Elise looked at them and smiled. Not out of obligation, not out of performance, but because it was impossible not to. Grace pulled away first, scampering down the porch steps with her notebook in hand. I'm going to write about the moon tonight, she yelled, her voice already halfway to the garden. Jonah watched her go, then turned to Elise. She's turning into a poet. She already is one, Elise said, her smile soft and certain. They went inside as the evening deepened, the warm light filtering in through the living room windows like honey. Jonah went to the workshop at the side of the house, his hands full of tools, his shirt already streaked with sawdust. He had been determined to fix the door to Grace's bedroom for weeks. It always stuck at the top, swollen from rain and time. I'm finally going to win this war, he called out over his shoulder. Elise laughed. It's a door, Jonah, not Normandy. Still, she knew better than to interfere. He liked fixing things not just because they needed repair, but because the act of mending felt like love in motion. She climbed the stairs to her reading nook, a small space near the attic window, where the light came in slow and soft. The house creaked under her feet, familiar and comforting, like the breath of something that had finally learned how to exhale. She sat in the armchair by the window, a cup of chamomile in hand, and reached for the journal, her mother's journal. It had become a sort of sacred text in recent months. She didn't read it every day, didn't clutch it like a lifeline. But when the ache crept in, or when the world outside felt a little too loud, she returned to it. Tonight felt like the right night. She opened to one of the final entries written just weeks before her mother passed. I spent too much of my life trying to hold everyone together with silence. I thought if I didn't stir the water, the boat wouldn't sink. But it turns out, still water sometimes drowns too. I hope Elise knows she didn't fail. That walking away wasn't weakness, it was the first step towards strength. And I hope Claire, if life ever humbles her enough to sit still, knows that no one was born broken. They only get that way when we stop believing we're worthy of healing. Elise closed the journal and rested it on her lap. Outside, she could hear Jonah hammering gently. The rhythmic tap-tap of determination. And beyond that, Grace's laughter chasing fireflies under the dying sun. This was what healing looked like. Not perfect, but whole. Later that evening, Jonah came in wiping his hands on an old towel. "I think I got it," he said. Elise looked up from her book, the door. He nodded, mock serious. "She opens like a dream now, smooth as butter." Elise stood stretched and walked down the hallway with him. She watched as he turned the knob and pushed it open. No creak, no resistance, just a soft glide. She smiled. "You really did it." Jonah leaned against the frame. "Some things are worth fixing the right way." Then he kissed her, a gentle, quiet kiss. The kind that didn't ask for anything, but gave everything. Later, after Grace had fallen asleep beneath a pile of stuffed animals and blankets, Elise returned to the reading nook. The house had gone still again. She stood by the window, moonlight washing across her face, and looked down at the driveway. The mailbox still had her name on it. Martin, a name she had almost discarded once. A name that no longer haunted her. She thought about this past not with bitterness, but with distance. Like a country she had visited once, stayed too long, and finally escaped. The pain had been real, but so had the healing. She turned back toward the house. Jonah was crouched in the hallway, adjusting one last screw on the hinge of a stubborn closet door. "Need help?" she asked. He looked up. "Nah, just one last thing to tighten." She watched him for a moment, then stepped into the kitchen and picked up the journal again. One page she hadn't read was marked with a dried flower petal. It was a letter, unfinished, to my girls. If you're reading this, it means you're still here. Still trying. Still choosing something other than despair. That alone means I did something right. The house is old. So are the wounds, but you don't have to live behind doors anymore. You don't have to prove anything. Just live and love and open what needs to be opened. I pray someday you'll both stand on the same side of a door with no locks, no keys, no distance. Just love. That's all that ever mattered. Elise stared at the page for a long time. Then she walked down the stairs out the front door into the night. Jonah was there watching her. "What is it?" he asked. She looked back at the door behind them, at the house, at everything it had meant and no longer meant. "No one's standing behind the door anymore," she said quietly. Jonah tilted his head. "What?" She smiled. "Because now," she whispered, "it's open."